I worked the night shift at a medium-sized hotel in my town. The main thing I did at my job was to stand at the front counter and attend to customers checking in or out. For the most part, though, barely anyone would be going in or out of the lobby during the night. When they did, they would just pass by, so I pretty much just stood there all night staring at the doors. Anyway, I would get the usual angry customers complaining about something or just being weird. But there was one night in particular that still stood out to me. It was a normal night, just like any other. As I stood at the front desk, there was a pretty big storm going on outside. Usually, whenever it's raining or there's bad weather in general, nobody goes in or out of the hotel. I pulled my phone out to pass the time, but a few minutes later, a man showed up at the entrance door. He walked through the first set of doors and then stopped, standing in the small area between the two sets of doors. He gazed through the glass, looking around the inside of the building, made quick eye contact with me, then awkwardly patted down his pockets and walked back out into the rain. It was pretty weird, but to be honest, I'd worked at a hotel long enough and met so many people that I was used to strange and awkward behavior. I assumed he just forgot his keys or something and had to get them back from his car. However, I should mention that I'd never seen this man before, though that wasn't uncommon due to most customers checking in or out during the day. Plus, he didn't have a suitcase or a bag or anything, so I just assumed he already had a room and everything. Another few minutes went by before the phone rang on my desk. The caller ID said it was an outside number, so I knew it wasn't anyone from one of the rooms. I picked it up, said the regular hotel introduction, and asked how I could help. A man was on the other line and said that he had parked in the front lot and needed help bringing in his luggage. He responded politely, saying that it was okay, but then he asked me if I could come out and help him, assuring me that he just needed me to roll in a small suitcase. This was a pretty strange request, but I told him that if he pulled his car up to the front door, then I could help him get situated. He paused for a moment, then said, "Okay," and hung up. A little bit annoyed, I walked around the desk and waited between the entrance doors. I stood there for probably 5 minutes before getting impatient. I opened the door and stuck my head outside. It was still pouring, but I could see the man from earlier across the parking lot, waving to me and motioning for me to come over. I got a really bad feeling, as the whole reason I wanted him to pull up to the front was so that we could be out of the rain. Why would someone want to walk with their luggage through a storm? I ignored him and closed the door, making my way back to my desk, figuring that if he needed my help, then he'd pull his car up to the front. As soon as I sat down, though, the man came through the doors. From how far he was in the parking lot, he had to have sprinted to get here that quickly. This time he came into the lobby and stood a few feet from the desk, breathing heavily. He immediately asked me the same question he had asked over the phone, requesting help with his small suitcase. Of course, I responded with the same response that he needed to pull the car up to the front. This time, though, he told me that he had already taken the luggage out of his car and didn't want to put it back in. I already had a bad feeling about this guy, but that response made me sure that there was something seriously wrong. I asked him if he had a room, assuring him that I needed to check him in before assisting him any further. He immediately grew angry, as if I had offended him with that question. He demanded that I come out and help him before he checked in, as his luggage was getting wet outside. At this point, I'd had enough and responded with a bit of an attitude, saying, "I've left your bags outside in the rain to begin with. If you refuse to check in, then I'm going to have to make you leave." He angrily turned around, giving me the middle finger on his way out the door. He didn't come in for the rest of the night, and when the morning crew came in, I told them about the man. As far as I know, he never checked in. This creeped me out, as I now knew that he wasn't even a customer of the hotel and was just some random guy trying to lure me into his car in the middle of a stormy night. I don't go on road trips much because I like flying when I need to travel far. But because I had to go to a family member's funeral on short notice, I had to drive about 10 hours to my cousin's house. I wasn't sure how long I'd be gone, so I packed enough things for a week and started driving the next morning at 10 a.m. It had been about 5 or 6 years since I drove this far, but I was still sure I could get there in one day without needing to stay at a hotel. A few hours into the drive, a storm started ahead of me. An hour later, I was driving through heavy rain and thunder. The roads were long and went through open fields and small forests. Some parts of the road were in valleys, so all the rainwater would flow onto the road because there was no way for it to drain. I had to slow down a lot to make sure I didn't slide off the road or get stuck in a flooded area. At one point, the road was completely flooded and I couldn't get through. I couldn't risk my car breaking down or getting stuck in the middle of nowhere, so I had to turn around and find a different way. This made the drive take much longer than I expected. After almost 8 hours of driving, I still had 5 more hours to go. The sun was setting, and I was really tired from focusing so much on driving in the rain. I knew I needed to find a place to rest before I could keep going. It took me 45 minutes of trying my best to stay awake before I found a small town where I could stop. When I say small town, I mean it had maybe 20 buildings and a few farmhouses spread out for miles. I drove around looking for a motel or someplace to stay, but there wasn't one. The best I could find was a small parking lot for a local grocery store, so I parked my car in the far corner. The town was really quiet, with only a few streetlights on and no cars on the roads. It felt a little creepy, so I made sure to lock my car and looked around for a few minutes before I leaned my seat back and closed my eyes. I know it seems like a bad idea, and I probably should have known better, but it was late and the rain was still pouring, so I wasn't too worried about anything happening that night. It felt safer than just parking on the side of an empty road with no help around if I needed it. 10 minutes later, I fell asleep to the sound of the heavy rain on my car. When I woke up, the thunder and lightning were louder. Looking around, I saw that the parking lot was much darker than when I first got there. In the distance, I saw someone walking towards my car. I watched them, hoping they'd turn or go somewhere else, but the closer they got, the more it looked like they were heading straight for me. The rain made it hard to see, but when he got about 20 feet away, I could tell it was a man. I started getting really creeped out, especially since it was pouring rain, and he didn't seem bothered by it at all. I could see he wasn't holding anything, so I felt sure he couldn't just break into my car. When he got just a few feet away, he started walking towards the back door. Instead of trying to open it or break in, he put his hands flat on the door and began pushing like he was trying to push my whole car. I didn't know what to think, but the fact that he was trying to push my car made it clear that this man was definitely crazy. I put my key in the ignition and started the car, turning on the headlights to let him know I was there, but he didn't even react. He just kept pushing like it was really important to him. I had enough and slowly started backing out. The man followed the car for a couple of steps, keeping his hands on it, then let go. He stood there and watched as I left the parking lot, then started walking back in the same direction he came from. I didn't stop again until I got to my cousin's house. I live in Washington State, and at the time, I lived with my parents in a small house far away from everything. It was about 20 minutes from the nearest town, and our closest neighbors were half a mile away in each direction. This is pretty normal here because there are lots of forests, small towns, and a few big cities. I had lived in that house my whole life, so I was used to being far away from other people, and it never scared me. But when I was 14, something happened that made me scared of where we lived. It was spring break, and my parents were going to take me to Florida. We were supposed to leave for the airport on Sunday morning, but something came up at my dad's work, so we had to cancel the trip. To make up for it, my parents took me to a water park on Sunday. It was fun, but I was still upset about the trip being canceled. We stayed at the water park for about 4 or 5 hours before we saw a big storm cloud coming fast. Everyone at the pool started to leave because it was getting close. By the time we got home, the storm had already hit. The rain was heavy, and there was a lot of thunder and lightning. This is when things started to get weird. We pulled into the driveway and saw that the garage was wide open. My dad thought he might have forgotten to close it, or that the sensor got stuck and stopped it, but my mom was sure she saw it close all the way when she left. Everything else seemed normal, though, so we got out of the car and went inside. My mom pressed the button to close the garage, and it worked fine. My parents went to the couch to watch TV, and I went upstairs to my room. The rain was coming down hard, making a loud rumbling sound all through the house. Halfway up the stairs, I thought I heard something moving in the hallway. I quickly kept going, looking to see if it was an animal, but there was nothing there. What I did notice was that my bedroom lights were on. This was strange, because I knew I hadn't turned the lights on that day, and I definitely wouldn't have left them on if I had. I wasn't sure what to think. I figured maybe I just forgot about the lights, or something weird happened with the wiring, and they turned on by themselves. I was still a little scared though, so I stood in the hallway for a while before finally walking to the door. I stood outside my room, listening carefully to make sure it was safe before going in. After a few moments of silence, I heard something moving around. It was quiet and faint, like a small rodent crawling between boxes. I slowly opened the door, thinking I might see a rat or something, but at first I didn't see anything. I went in and closed the door behind me. My room looked completely normal and untouched. Normally, if an animal gets inside, there are signs of a mess, but there was nothing like that. I got down on my knees and checked under the bed and around the floor for any signs of an animal, but there was nothing. I sat on my bed, trying to think about how strange everything was. As I sat there, a shadow suddenly moved quickly across the bottom of my bedroom door from the hallway. My heart skipped a beat because I could tell by the size of the shadow that it was a person. I jumped up from my bed, scared and trying to figure out what to do since I was pretty much trapped in my room, unless I wanted to risk running out. I grabbed my phone and texted my dad, saying that someone else was upstairs. Almost right away, I saw that he had read the message, and I could hear him quickly coming up the stairs. I stood by my door, feeling nervous as I listened to the footsteps getting closer, thinking someone might jump in. A few seconds later, he opened the door. He looked at me with concern, and I quickly whispered to him what I had seen. I think he could hear the fear in my voice, and we both quietly went down the hall and back downstairs. Just as we reached the bottom of the stairs, there was a loud thud from upstairs, followed by fast footsteps running down the hall. We rushed into the living room, where my dad grabbed a small bat that was lying in the corner, but the footsteps kept coming, and then we heard the front door slam open. We turned the corner and saw the door wide open, with a man running away in the distance. My dad called 911, and they arrived about 30 minutes later because of where we lived. They talked to my parents and asked me a few questions before searching the house for a while and then leaving. As far as I know, they never found the man, but it seemed like someone knew we were supposed to leave for vacation that morning This is unsettling because it means the person who broke into our house is probably someone our family knows and talks to. It makes you start to question who your real friends are.